Chapter 1 Thunderstruck. For by him were all things created, that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones, or dominions, or principalities, or powers. All things were created by him and for him. Colossians 1:16. Suddenly, one enormous thunderclap sounded. The entire earth shook from its fury. Every person around the world stood frozen for a moment in time. Workers in the fields looked up at cloudless skies in wonder. Students slouching in class sat upright and became attentive. People sitting staring at their computer screens shook off their dull haze and ran to find a window to look outside. Millions sat up in bed, woken out of their peaceful dreams. Thunderstorms frighten many people when the lightning flashes brightly and the thunder roars for an eternity, but not here. Every soul on earth united for only a few seconds with a wonder and awe that the thunder had called them. The call touched believers and non-believers alike. Deep down in the core of their beings, every man, woman, and child knew that the thunder had a purpose. The raging echo that shook the air announced something that the sense of hearing couldn't discern. No horn declaring the start of a battle was ever as moving. Then it ended. Billions of people, briefly stunned with a never-before-felt clarity, were enveloped again in the haze of their lives. The event had deeply stirred so many, but the web of deceit woven by the king of lies once again captured the people of the world. However, very soon it would unravel, and all because of one little girl. Chapter 2 The Letter. "Regina, was that thunder?" Regina Marie Andrews' mother called out from upstairs where she was giving her younger brother a bath. The thunder had ended, but it still had Regina in its grip. Unlike other people, Regina had a very specific feeling and thought when the crashing noise sounded. While other people could vaguely feel their spirits being stirred, Regina specifically remembered all of the times she had felt God's love, either directly or through the love of her family. She always felt comfort in these moments. Regina knew God and loved him. When she prayed, she could feel his arms wrap her up and hold her. Many children her age could say they knew about God and had been told about his love. But Regina, even as a small child at church, would look at the face of Jesus in paintings and feel his presence and warmth. At times, however, she would also feel something different. She could sense when something changed in the room and could feel a darkness enter before someone became upset or something bad happened, or feel a warmth right before something wonderful occurred. You would think that all of this would make her older beyond her years, but it didn't. She still giggled at the boys at her school, cried when she skinned her knee, and loved being tucked in at night. She would quarrel with her little brother, Emmanuel Joseph, just like all other siblings do. She even forgot to brush her teeth before bed. The powerful emotions that held Regina during the thunder had brought her into a deep prayer of thanksgiving when her mother's voice pulled her out. "Regina, are you there?" Her mother's sweet voice never had stunned her before, but when it dragged her from her wonderful trance, it left her stunned for a moment. Regaining her senses, Regina answered loudly,
"Yes, Mommy."
"It's so strange," her mother said as she closed the door to the bathroom. She said this because it's not often that a person would hear thunder in December in Illinois. On top of that, after the recent snowstorm that dumped several inches of snow on their Chicago suburb, the sky had been crystal clear and sun had shined every day. This nice weather had started melting the snow to such a degree that Emmanuel had made quite a mess of himself while he was out playing in the snow. Her mother would be cleaning him up for a long time. Regina returned to doing a craft in the dining room that she was working on before the thunder sounded. She liked working with her art supplies on Saturday mornings, while her parents were busy running errands and her brother was off playing on his own. She had just started getting into her work when the doorbell interrupted her. She hopped up to answer it because it was usually her neighbor Ellie who would come over to play on weekends. As she came up to the front door, she could see through the frosted glass that an adult stood there. Her parents had told her never to answer the door for anyone she didn't know, and that she should come and get them so they could answer it. Remembering her parents' admonitions, she walked over to a side window and barely slid the curtain over to sneak a peek. She saw that a mailman stood there patiently at the door. Regina's father had gone to the store, and her mother had her hands full upstairs.
"Mommy, the mailman is at the door."
Regina called out to her mother. She waited for a response, but reasoned that the running water in the tub had drowned out her shouts. She wanted to follow the rules, but she didn't want to bother her mother while she was working. So she went back to the window to sneak another look, but this time the mailman was smiling broadly and looking right at her through the space between the curtain and window where she spied on him. Regina pulled her head back and gasped. How could he have known she had peeked at him? She had barely pulled the curtain back enough to expose her eyeball. It couldn't have moved enough. She wondered if she had been imagining it. She gathered up her courage and decided to walk around to the other window and see if he still had his gaze set on the first window. She slid the curtain slightly back, and this time he faced her again, winked, and held up an envelope that had her name written on it. With all this, her fear melted away, and she boldly decided that she could confidently open the door and get her mail. She had never had her own mail, and something in his smile said, "Do not be afraid." She slid over to the door and cautiously opened it. The locked screen door still protected her from the outside world. Regina stared at the mailman and wondered what fascinated her so much about him. Again the mailman smiled, and looking in her eyes, bent over and placed the letter on the front porch. As he began to rise, he paused briefly to bow, and then abruptly turned and walked away without a word. Regina desperately wanted to say something, but her lips wouldn't part, and she couldn't even form a coherent thought to begin a sentence. She watched the mailman as he walked away. He didn't turn back, and he didn't go to any of the neighbors' houses. He simply walked down the street. Regina quickly unlocked the door, stepped outside, and picked up the letter. Although Regina was too young to notice, the letter did not have an address, a return address, or a stamp. Someone had very nicely written, in beautiful handwriting, her name, in the middle like one would for a card that goes on a birthday or Christmas present. She looked up again, but couldn't see the mailman anymore. He should have only been a few feet further. Where did he go? Deep in thought, Regina went back inside and locked both doors. She stared at the spotless white envelope with black letters that she could now see were highlighted in a splendid gold outline. Beautiful, she thought to herself. She couldn't remember ever having something this exquisite in her life. At the same time, she wanted to tear the envelope apart and save it forever. After a few moments of excitement, a different thought came over her. Should she tell her mother? Normally, she wouldn't hesitate to share anything, but this was different. She had never gotten her own mail before. She had also never felt this excited about anything in her life. She had to open this letter. She had to read its contents, and she had to do it on her own. Regina took the envelope upstairs and tiptoed to the bathroom where her mother was giving her brother a bath. She put her ear to the door and heard the water splashing and her mother's voice. This meant she still had time to sneak into her room and open the letter in private. Regina went into her room and closed the door. She and her mother had decorated it in a princess motif. Her father had painted the walls pink, and many famous princesses adorned the sheets, her shelves, and her desk. Regina always felt happy in her sanctuary, and now was very excited to have her own newfound treasure all to herself. She turned on the lights and sat down on her bed. The smooth envelope felt cool and light in her hands. She looked at her own name, and for a moment thought that the letters had glowed briefly. She turned it over, opened it, and pulled out the card, and it said, "Midnight at Nativity." Regina looked at the words, and they burned into her mind. Then a knock came at the door. "Regina, are you in there?" Regina looked up at the door and thought to herself, "I need to hide the letter." As she looked back down to take the letter to a hiding spot, it first turned to pieces of dust and then flashed into nothingness. She stared in wonder for a moment and then remembered to answer.
"Yes, I'm here."
Her mother opened the door and asked, "Are you ready to take a bath?" Catherine Andrews stuck her pretty face through the crack she had made in the door, and her infectious smile stunned Regina for a moment. The strange events that had just passed conveniently dropped from her mind, so her thoughts would not betray her to her mother. Her mom had her hair pulled back in a scrunchie, and Regina assumed she had her favorite holiday pants on. Despite this, Regina admired her mother's natural beauty and hoped that she would be that lovely when she grew up.
"Sure,"
Regina said. She hopped off her bed and went into the bathroom with her mother for a bath. Regina had her bath and throughout the whole process had a difficult time focusing on what her mother said and asked about. She had so many questions that had crept into her mind and didn't know how many of them would ever be answered. Who was the mailman? What would happen at midnight? What if someone found out? She kept rolling through these thoughts, but always ended on the fact that there was no one who could help her answer. For For the rest of the day, she excused herself from family activities as much as she could by asking for reading time. But this couldn't get her out of eating dinner together, which they always did. "Anything interesting happened today, G?" Regina's father, Mark Andrews, rarely called her Regina. Sometimes he would call her Gina, but most of the time he would affectionately call her G.
No, nothing.
She lied. She felt bad at first, but then wondered if it even could be counted as a lie. She couldn't say for sure that anything had actually happened. In fact, no one would believe her story anyways, since she didn't have the letter to offer as proof. As the day wore on, the excitement had died down, and Regina began to doubt her own memories. Did a mysterious mailman deliver a vanishing letter? Did she remember those 3 words correctly, if she had even seen the letter? She had to wait for midnight? She normally was asleep by 9. How could she stay awake that long? Later that day, as her mother kissed her goodnight, the question still blazed in Regina's mind. After her mother left the room, Regina looked at the clock, which clearly said 9:04. She still had to wait nearly 3 hours to find out if she had lost her mind or... what? What alternative existed? She had no idea what the other option was. Suddenly, without warning, her eyelids started to feel extremely heavy, and before she could even complete the desperate thought, "I need to stay," she drifted off to sleep. Regina's eyes popped open and drank in the darkness of the room. Midnight. Was it too late? Filled with a terrible dread, she rolled to the fearsome red of the digital clock. 11:56. There was still time. She scampered out of bed and walked over to the door. Sliding the door open, she peeked her head out and listened for any sounds. Her room stood next to the staircase, on the opposite side of the upstairs hallway from her parents' and brother's bedrooms. Never had she wondered how convenient this would be one day. But grateful, she slipped out of her room and slinked down the stairs. At the bottom of the stairs was the front door, where she had gotten the letter that afternoon. As easily as the memories of the encounter with the mailman had slipped her mind, they jumped back in, and she found herself ever so sure that they had all happened. Regina turned to the right into the family room, where the family's nativity scene sat on a short bookcase where she and her brother kept their storybooks and children's encyclopedias. She and her mother had set this up only 1 week ago at the beginning of Advent, along with the Christmas tree and other decorations. Minutes remained before midnight, but she had already had her gaze fixed on the nativity that she barely saw in the moonlight's glow. Since Christmas had still not arrived, the only characters in the manger were Mary and Joseph, along with some animals. The shepherd stood watch outside. The baby Jesus hid behind until one of the children would place him in the cradle on Christmas Day. And the wise men lined up across the room waiting for the Epiphany to finally make their arrival. As Regina stared at the little statue of Mary, which bent down looking at the cradle where Jesus would soon lie, she felt warmth fill her body, and an ethereal light filled the room. Instead of feeling the normal response of fear, Regina felt completely comfortable and a joy that she would never have the words to describe. Regina turned in calm anticipation to see the speaker of those words. She had heard clearly, and she knew she didn't understand what had been spoken to her, but when she went to replay them in her mind, she had to shake her head, because the foreign words that came out of the angel's mouth were translated to, "Hail, chosen one." As she gazed around, she beheld the most beautiful being she had ever seen alive in pictures or in movies. She knew she had beheld an angel, but after a second she realized that the angel's face was that of a mailman from earlier in the day. He had the same smile, and he flashed it at her again, relaxing her even further. Her face betrayed her bewilderment, so he again spoke in the foreign tongue. But Regina clearly understood him. "You hear me speak in the language of heaven, and you understand because the Lord had deemed it so. Regina, you have been chosen by the Father to carry out an important role in His holy work." The fact that he radiated a brilliant light that didn't seem to completely fill the house amazed Regina. She stared right at him without squinting or needing to look away. The angel now had long, brown flowing hair and simply wore a long white robe. His wings splayed out to his sides and fluttered slightly as if moving on their own. Regina stared for a while, still in complete awe. The angel continued to smile and made no indication that he would speak again. He seemed content to let her make the next move.
Who are you?
Regina asked quietly when she had gathered up the courage. "I'm sorry, where are my manners? I am Gabriel, messenger of heaven."
Saint Gabriel, the archangel?
Regina asked clearly, even though her mind and heart were racing faster than she had ever imagined they could. "Oh, good, you've heard of me," Gabriel joked reassuringly. Regina thought to herself that she had heard a lot of things that she had never imagined would be confronting her like this. "Since we know each other so well, you won't mind if we get down to business." Regina, full of hundreds of more questions that she had earlier in the day, asked,
What business do you have with me, St. Gabriel?
"Child, if we are going to see each other often, we don't need to be so formal. You can call me Gabe." Gabriel winked just like he had done earlier when he had spotted Regina peeking through the curtain, and he still wore the same pleasant smile.
Okay, Gabe.
Regina complied hesitantly. Gabriel's friendliness definitely made her more comfortable, but she was so full of wonder she could barely contain herself. She tried the next questions on her mind.
Why are you here, and why will we see each other so much?
He took a couple of steps away from Regina and sat down in a leather recliner, and as he did so, the brilliant light which had bathed him dimmed a little, and he motioned for her to sit on a nearby couch. Regina found that she had been kneeling the whole time, and got up and slid over to the couch. At this point, she gave her first thought on whether her parents would wake up and find an angel in their house. Reading her mind, Gabriel said, "Your parents or your brother will not wake while I am here, Regina. And what you tell them about my visit is yours to decide. In fact, I must tell you something very important, and then you must make a difficult decision." This perplexed Regina more than anything else that Gabriel had told her so far. With great anticipation and maybe fear, she asked,
What do you have to tell me?
Gabriel looked at Regina and paused for a moment. Although this did not make her particularly uncomfortable, it certainly impressed upon her the serious nature of his visit, despite the friendliness. "Regina, the Most High loves all his creatures, but on some he places special favor. With that favor, some excel in beauty, some in strength, and some like you in gentleness of spirit and faith." Regina never had thought about either of those two gifts, and whether she possessed them or not. Her parents had nurtured her faith, and they had created a loving and caring home for her, so it would come as no surprise that she would have a gentle disposition. Again reading her mind, Gabriel said, "Your parents have done a wonderful job of raising you, but you must understand that faith is a gift, and the Lord formed your soul within you before your parents knew you were in the womb. You have received your gifts well, and been thankful in a way pleasing to the Lord. You are a remarkable child, my dear."
Thank you, Gabriel.
"Gabe?" insisted Gabriel, smiling slightly despite the seriousness that he had recently taken on.
Sorry, Gabe.
Regina corrected herself. "The Lord has given you these gifts from his flowing generosity, and rightly your life has been a worthy thanksgiving. But now he asks for more if you are willing," the angel complimented. He leaned forward and spoke the last part very slowly and carefully. Regina pondered what Gabriel had said for a moment and replied,
What does he ask of me?
"Regina, throughout the ages, God has called his people to serve him. He calls some to religious life, others to marriage, still others to live chastely in the regular world. In addition to these, the Most High has called some to play special roles when the world most needed them. You can read of these holy ones in the Scriptures, and you have heard of them throughout church history in the lives of the saints. The world needs someone to inspire them to learn and live the faith. The Father has chosen you to be that person." Regina said,
I don't understand how I could do anything like that. I'm only 8 and I'm kind of shy. How would I inspire anyone to do anything?
Gabriel said, "God knows you better than you know yourself. He would not have sent me here had he not believed in you, so you definitely have it within you. However, before you think about it any further, I would like to show you something from the past that may help you with your fear. Would you like to see what I have to show you?" Regina believed all that the angel had said, but he had been right. She had never felt such fear. She also wanted to know what the angel had for her to see.
Yes, please, Gabe. I would like to see what you can show.
"Close your eyes, child, and pray with me, and you will see something that so many in the world have forgotten and need to remember. Let us pray as Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven." As Regina joined in on the Lord's Prayer, she felt her body feel so heavy that it fell away from her soul, and the world began to slip away.